So, we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, the Power Compass podcast. I'm Dr. Steve Vinay, and I'm here with Dr. Paul Donovan. We're both fascinated, excited, thrilled by the topic of power. We've both got PhDs in the subject, we've both written on it, and we're here to give you many episodes, that's our plan, on the topic of power, exploring lots of different facets, different theoretical understandings, different philosophical understandings, different practical understandings, because we want to empower you to be able to understand power and use it more wisely, more skillfully, and more successfully.
Absolutely. You see, we're of the contention that power is not discussed as much as it most sensibly would. We consider power to be like the electricity that runs through us and the roles that elevate one person from the other. And we want to give some visibility to that electricity. We want to talk about what's actually making the difference. And that is power. It's the central question in leadership of any kind, personal leadership, leadership in roles that people take that might elevate them above other people in those roles. The question of power is central. The question of whether you exercise good leadership largely rests upon whether you have consciously and skillfully used the power in that role as effectively as you could. So that's why we're so delighted to be talking about it. We're absolutely rapt. And we have this first question, and that is, why don't we talk about power? Why is not power talked about very much? You know, and it's not. In fact, Dr. Julie Diamond, who wrote Power, A User's Guide, says that in modern day America, sex is easier to talk about than power. And it is the last taboo. It is the last taboo. But it doesn't serve us to be a taboo. And so, I don't know, why do you think, Vinay, it is so difficult for power, and whether someone has power or not power, to be something that a conversation lands upon, or a TV or an interviewer might raise? Why is that? Why doesn't it happen, Vinay, do you think?
Well, I think because really power is the context in which we've all been hurt, sometimes traumatized, because we've all been in power relationships where we've had less power because as children, we're down power. Yeah. It's our first down power relationship, and of course, not only with our parents, but with the adults around us in general, and specifically in school environments. And even within our peers at school, there's the different grades and the pecking order that exists. So all of us have been subject to power at a time where we were vulnerable. And yes, often it's been used against us in ways which are very painful or debilitating. And so often it's, we develop this attitude towards power as it's something bad, or it's something that's used to hurt other people. And it's natural to carry that attitude forward in life. So I think that's a big influence. And it's not just childhood. Also, in the adult world, in our adult relationships, there's a lot of situations where, again, we can be hurt by power. Bosses who, summarily fire us, or different kinds of injustice. I think pretty well everyone's had those experiences. So power becomes associated with something fearful, with something negative, with something painful. So I think it's not too surprising from that point of view that a lot of people avoid talking about it.
Yeah, well said. You've reminded me of something that I do sometimes when I'm teaching power to corporate groups, and I put up a slide, an image of lots of different boxes of pictures, from everything from Tom Cruise to a Hummer car to a tiger to a religious leader to a forest. And I ask people which one of these images they relate to power. And I'm always curious, the diversity in the room. Power is such a subjective thing. How we hold the notion of power in our minds is quite distinct and personal to us. But when I ask about the feelings they have, when I say, what would you say if I said someone has power? Like you've said, most people say they don't like that. They're uncomfortable with it, and they don't like to think of themselves as having power. There's a minority that do, but most actually aren't very comfortable with that idea. And this is I'm going to introduce our first power concept here, Vinay, and power over, power with, power to. And there's a reactive and a creative version of all of those three that we'll talk about later on. But most of our first connections of power is because someone has exercised power over us. But it doesn't have to be the only way power is exercised, but in fact it's the places that it's most memorable for us that it is in that way, as you've said. Power over, but power with, the ability to be able to exercise power with a collective, power that's generated by joining with people to achieve something, the momentum that's created, that's a remarkable thing. And the power too, like the power that comes from having a mission, a quest of some kind, the power that can flow through us when we're driven by wanting to make a contribution. There's a power that comes when we have the power to, T-O, power. So yeah, it's exciting.
And yeah, so I think that highlights some of your and my personal values, which is that we carry into this podcast, that we're not just interested in discussing philosophy or organizational practice. We're certainly interested in helping people become more skillful and knowledgeable. Fundamentally, though, we carry these values with us that are about empowerment, that are about contributing to a better world, this larger vision, and we're interested in how what we do in this podcast and how we support people can assist in the development of a better world, a much bigger vision even than organizational visions or personal visions. So that's something that I think drives you and I.
Yes, and absolutely, thank you for that. And perhaps we should then go to the ever-present notion of power. It is really so alive between us. Power is running between every interaction, and we usually remain somewhat unconscious of it. But if you consider it in the most obvious cases, where you might have, for instance, in the context where I work in a corporate world, someone might give feedback to somebody else, or someone might run a meeting, or hire someone, or choose to be silent in a meeting, or interrupt somebody. They're all power moves. They're all power moves. Even stopping and listening can be a big power move. And so there's nothing we're doing which doesn't have, and especially when we look to influence in any way, we're looking to use the currency of power to do so in one form or another. So I'm wanting to, and I know we both are, wanting to wake people up to how you're using power around you. When you notice you've suddenly have more power, when do you sit down with friends, for instance, and you notice, I've got more money than they do. Oh, I feel a little elevated here. Or maybe you're sitting with friends and you realize these guys have got all of them have got more money than I do.
Or houses.
And bigger houses and nicer cars and go on better holidays, and and suddenly you might be feeling less powerful. So these things can affect us. We're going to talk about in subsequent episodes the importance of building personal power, which is more robust, more portable, more resilient to context. But even then, most of us will walk into an interactional context and notice, to use your language, I'm like, am I down or up here?
That's right. There's always that little ranking that goes on. It's I think a mammalian thing. Who's where on the pecking order? And I want to come in because you mentioned personal power, which is like we can simplify in some ways power into a number of different dimensions. And one, as you say, is personal power. And people can have personal power, but not necessarily other kinds of power. However, personal power can easily spill over into acquiring, for instance, role power. That's another classical type of power, the power of the position. That's not so much about the person, but it's the resources and role that they exercise. And also, when you're discussing about, who's got the house of the income, you're also talking about another kind of power that we could call the power of status, which is not necessarily just personal, and it's not necessarily to do with a role. It's more to do with social perception, and yet it's very significant. And there's a complex way in which these three types of power can interact with each other, can augment each other, or can in some way almost exist a little bit separately. So someone can not have particular role power, and they not even feel that powerful personally, and yet they may have a lot of status, and they may not even enjoy it that much. So it's kind of, there's a lot of analysis which we won't go into here, but in subsequent episodes about these. And I mean, there's a fourth type of power that we should mention, because you mentioned power with, which is the power of the collective. So that's also another dimension of power. So we want to kind of just introduce to people these different dimensions. And
I think that's great. Thank you.
I want to say one more thing, which is yeah, it's an issue because I work with, especially in therapy, with individuals and couples and families particularly. So, for instance, in a couple, this issue of power is quite significant often because people usually come into a relationship with some kind of power differential. Now, that might be knowledge. Someone's got a PhD and someone else has just got a undergraduate degree, or maybe someone haven't been to university. That's one kind of differential. Another differential is when people come into a relationship with different economic resources, whether it be from their family, or they've got a business, or they've got an income. So when I'm working with couples, these are always things that are often difficult to deal with and can be sources of conflict. They flare up, but to be able to talk about them and successfully address them is something a lot of couples don't have the resources for. I mean, let's say a woman moves into a man's house and he's got the house. I have a client like this. He's very hardworking and quite successful, and he works really, really hard for it. And he bought a house. He's in his 30s. His partner, she's kind of easygoing, and she's got a job that just ticks along and gives her lots of free time, and so she lives in his house, and it's a bit of a bone of contention. She's kind of tense if he says anything that indicates it's his house, because she wants to feel it's our house, but it's not our house. I mean, it's in his name. He earned it, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on with that. So power isn't just something that needs to be addressed in terms of organizational position or what's happening at work. It's also very much in the interpersonal and social and family sphere as well. Even different members of a family will have different power. The thing about the houses or the cars, different aunts or uncles or brothers or sisters, as they develop in the world, you get the power differential within a family, and that also creates divisions or conflicts or tensions.
Wow, great examples. And I see this in a corporate setting. In fact, I was working with a team not so long ago where the CEO of this executive team was quite spoken, had come from a different culture. It was actually European, and it was here in Australia. But there were some members of the team who'd been on that executive team for years, long before this CEO had come. What's more, couple of those members were highly articulate, had higher qualifications, could really speak so fluently. And so in terms of status, as you mentioned, or sometimes I think of it as social power, there was a kind of an interesting little battle going here, because you have the CEO, this quite spoken European fellow, but then you've got others who every now and again are pulling on their social power, whereby they can speak much more easily and fluently. They make reference to their multiple degrees, and And there is a certain kind of power that they're utilizing to stand up to or challenge or dismiss a formal authority power that the CEO is standing in. And so it's a subtle game. And especially if, in this case, this formal CEO was looking to establish certain norms in the team about how they talk to each other, but there was one of these members who didn't think that norm was so good, who kept breaking it. And this particular by looking at their phone during the meeting. And it became really kind of a standoff. And here you've just got different kinds of power playing off one another. And I remember when I came in to work with this team, when I explained that there was different kinds of power and that they're being used in the room in this way without anyone being wrong about it, it was such a relief in this team. That's what we're seeing. Because the body of people who were quiet were sort of being pulled between one and the other, and not sure what was happening. They couldn't give language to it. But power was at work. Power was present in the room, being utilized and drawn upon in various ways, both formally in the role, but informally, socially, via status. That made the interaction, the field in which they're working, very complicated.
Yeah, and you're making it visible by what you're doing. So that's partly what we want to do is put the dust on, and people can see kind of a bit more clearly what's going on and understand it, and therefore, be able to deal with it.
Yes, I wanted to help make it visible. It's my role as a facilitator, but my knowledge of power and my experience of working with it helped give language to do that. It's very, very, very helpful.
So much to talk about. So what should we discuss next? Power paradox or leadership moments, or what do you think?
Yeah, let's go to. I think we've talked about the fact that the power is present within us and very visible between us, and let's edit out this little bit of poo bar where I'm just sort of thinking about that. Why does this matter? Maybe we should go to that.
Sure.
This is a relatively short episode, but maybe a good episode to... Yeah, where I think this leads to, Vinay, is why does it matter? Why do we want to talk about these things? Because every organization, every relationship is full of power. There's power dynamics and there's power flowing and through virtue of the interactions. And our charge, our responsibility, in fact, what you and I, Vinay, are trying to do in this podcast and the podcast to come, is help people understand that power is being used and to use it more consciously in service of something worthy. And if you want to be someone who can utilize power in something worthy, to some worthy end, then please listen to these podcasts, because we're going to share about how to use it, because it's not straightforward. It requires skill, and it requires depth, and it requires a willingness to self-reflect.
Exactly.
Because using it, as you and I have sometimes said, it's like power is like a chainsaw. It can do some terrible things, or it could do great things. So it's good to know, if I've got a chainsaw and we're whirling it around a little bit, it's going to hurt people if we're not using it consciously. And it will also be used toward poor end. So we want these episodes to be a journey where you, the listener and viewer, would start to love to notice how you're using power.
Okay, so I think the next thing that'd be good to introduce is something called the power paradox.
Yes.
This is something that we're going to go much more into subsequent episodes. This provides an understanding with the quizzical question of what goes on when people attain positions of power. Even people who seem well-intentioned, who seem to be good people, something goes a bit awry, and there's all sorts of phenomena like the BMW phenomena. You know, people driving BMWs seem to have less sensitivity to pedestrians. What is that? So power paradox unlocks some of these things. So we're just going to headline it now. You can explain it to
really
people.
does. And the person who made this particular idea famous was Professor Dacher Keltner from Berkeley. And after decades of research, he ultimately wrote a relatively small book that just in a really pithy way explained that when we get elevated in rank in one way or another by, you know, jumping in a BMW or driving, or even experimentally, he could help people prime them. He called them to feel powerful. By asking them to think about people who are, for instance, way less well off than they were, and as a result they started to feel powerful. And when they started to feel powerful, they started to behave in really weird ways. And it was, in fact, biochemical. The more we start to feel above, the more we start to feel powerful by contrast in comparison to others, we actually have less ability to read the emotions of others. We think that our judgment suddenly becomes more effective. We think we have greater control than we do over other circumstances. All sorts of strange things happen to us. But as Professor Keltner makes clear, all of this can be outsmarted. It doesn't have to be that way. But for many of us, when we get elevated in power, we fall prey to the power paradox. And so we're going to spend time in the subsequent episodes looking at what it is and how to outsmart the power paradox, because this is one of the reasons why we get so befuddled by looking at people in very senior roles behaving so strangely. Often in organizations, we'll be working with a group that they're not the executive team, they'll be below. And I'll say, have you noticed that the people above you seem kind of weird? And then there's these laughs, and then I see nods everywhere, because it can make us a bit weird when we get senior, really elevated. We start to find we don't read people well. We start to be awkward in conversations, and we tend to see more of the world through our own lens, unless you really can outsmart it. And so that's one of the things we're going to talk about. And we wanted to introduce that, Vinay, in this first episode, to say power is a fascinating topic, and it's worthy of our consideration to get good at how to use it.
That's right. Yeah. And if you understand what goes on, you understand the pitfalls, and then you can also do something different. You don't have to get weird, but it requires some consciousness, which is, I guess, the next thing that we want to talk about, which is being conscious about the use of power, using power for the good and using it skillfully. And there's a lot of things we're going to talk about in subsequent episodes to help you do that, to help equip you with the knowledge and skills so that you can use power in ways which are effective and beneficial, and get people, well, not always get people on your side, but as much as possible work alongside with the people who are under you. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be helping you utilize power consciously and with heart. So you can do more than just power over. Not all power over is bad, by the way. But you can power over, you can power with, you can power to, but you can do it skillfully and with heart. And in later episodes, we'll be talking about the 150% principle. So we'll be talking about the extra responsibility you take for the health of this field, this interactional space between us. If you're the one with more rank, then take more responsibility. We'll talk about why that's so important and how to do it. We're going to talk about the role of anxiety, that if you have persistent, unexamined anxiety, then you may more likely fall prey to the power paradox. So it's one of the requirements of utilizing power well is to live profoundly examined life. And if you do so, you're more likely to
to lead well using power beautifully. That self-awareness is critical. So these are some of the things that are coming in subsequent episodes.
That's right. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, it's not even a question of like, do I have power? Do I want power? It's really a question of asking, where do I already have influence? Because everybody has some kind of influence in their life over someone or something, whether it be a formal situation or an informal situation.
Yeah.
Many of us are parents, or in my case, grandparents, and we have a lot of influence over the people in our charge or the people who are dependent on us. So this is really for everyone to understand, how do we exert that, and also importantly, in terms of feedback, and we're going to be talking about this as well, how feedback works and understanding ourselves more fully, because how can I be more aware of how other people experience me? You were just telling a story before about that, Paul. Perhaps that's illustrative about the client you're just working with and the identity thing.
Yeah. It was a notion. We were just talking about it off air, and I was working with a client who just was processing their feedback and via a 360 tool, and noticed that the people who'd given her feedback really didn't see her as a people person, but actually as gifted and strong around strategy, results orientation, and decisiveness. And I was encouraging her to own the power that comes from being really gifted in those things, rather than using it unconsciously. She was and never feeling like she was good enough, because she was constantly feeling like she was failing at being a people person. Now, of course, it's essential to build people skills, but her real special source, her real gifting was around occupying the space around strategy. And for her, then she can utilize the natural authority and power she has when it comes to seeing complex issues and knowing the way forward. And this is going to help her use her power more effectively, more consciously. And this is the path we'd want to invite you in listening to these podcasts. It's a continual process of gaining wisdom at higher levels of complexity. And this is an exciting journey. Vinay and I are constant learners, constantly reflecting on our own behavior and how we're using our power effectively, and where we're stepping in of it, where we're avoiding it, and the effect we're having on others around us. And so that's what's ahead. And I thank you for joining us. We really hope you enjoy this journey, because it's one that we feel very passionate about and are convinced it can add enormous value to your growth and your journey.
That's right. That's right. We're doing this podcast partly because we like talking with each other, and partly because we're fascinated by the subject.
Yes.
Also, though, because this is our way of being powerful by spreading the message and spreading the information. There's not a lot around, really, about power. There's not a lot of leadership courses discuss leadership, but they don't necessarily really talk about power specifically. So we want to come into what we see as a gap in the field and be able to contribute and be able to feel like we can use all our knowledge and experience, a lot of experience between us, both in the personal development and therapy and interpersonal field that I come from, and the organizational field that you come from, to be able to contribute and make a difference in the world. So this is also our excitement about blossoming and developing through this podcast ourselves and you as well.
Yeah, this is our journey. This is our service to you. And it's our intended contribution. We hope you can receive it.